For 28 years, I watched my daughter Jessica grow from a chubby-cheeked toddler into a stunning woman, and through every milestone, every triumph, every heartbreak, I was there. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I held her hand on her first day of school, cheered from the bleachers at every soccer game, and worked double shifts at my floral shop to pay for her college education at Northwestern. I thought we were close, thought she valued my presence in her life. That illusion shattered the day she told me I was too old to be part of her wedding. The conversation that changed everything happened on a crisp October afternoon in my cozy kitchen in Millbrook, Connecticut. Jessica had driven over from her downtown apartment, her engagement ring catching the autumn sunlight streaming through my windows. She seemed unusually tense as she settled into the chair where she'd done homework as a child, where we'd shared countless heart-to-heart conversations over the years. "Mom, we need to talk about the wedding," she began, her voice carrying an edge I'd rarely heard directed at me. I set down my coffee mug, giving her my full attention, assuming she wanted my help with planning details, or perhaps needed advice about managing the stress that comes with organizing such a significant event. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Are you having second thoughts about the venue? I know Riverside Gardens is expensive, but if that's where you've dreamed of having your ceremony, we'll find a way to make it work." I had been quietly researching ways to help fund her dream wedding, even considering taking out a second mortgage on my house if necessary. Jessica's expression hardened in a way that made my stomach clench with sudden apprehension. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss. Ryan and I have been talking, and we've decided we want a more contemporary celebration. Something modern and sophisticated, not old-fashioned." I nodded encouragingly, though I wasn't sure where this conversation was heading. "That sounds wonderful, honey. Your wedding should reflect your personality and vision. What changes are you thinking about making?" She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what came next. "We want the wedding party to be young and vibrant. Carol has been helping us plan everything, and she's made some excellent suggestions about creating the right aesthetic for our photos and the overall atmosphere." Carol Blake, Ryan's mother, was a formidable woman who had made her opinions about me abundantly clear from the moment Jessica brought Ryan home. She belonged to the Millbrook Country Club, drove a luxury sedan, and had never worked a day in her life thanks to her late husband's successful law practice. She viewed my modest lifestyle and working-class background with barely concealed disdain, often making pointed comments about maintaining standards and appropriate social circles. "I'm glad you're getting help with the planning," I said, carefully, sensing an undercurrent I didn't quite understand. "What specifically are you thinking about changing?" Jessica couldn't meet my eyes as she delivered the blow that would redefine our relationship forever. "Mom, we've decided that the wedding party should only include people who fit the overall vision we have for the day. The photographer Carol recommended specializes in editorial-style shoots, very high-end and fashion-forward. She thinks having older people in prominent roles might date the photos and detract from the modern aesthetic we're going for." The words hit me like a physical blow, though I still didn't fully grasp what she was suggesting. "Older people? What do you mean?" "I mean, Mom, that maybe you should reconsider your role in the wedding. Carol thinks it would be better if you attended as a regular guest rather than having a special position. You're 62, and in all the inspiration photos we've been looking at, the mothers are much younger, more stylish. We don't want our wedding to look dated or frumpy." The silence that followed felt endless. I stared at my daughter, searching her face for some sign that this was a cruel joke or a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by wedding stress. But her expression remained resolute, even slightly defensive, as if she'd anticipated my shock, and prepared herself to stand firm against any objections I might raise. "You're telling me I'm too old to be part of your wedding?" I said slowly, needing to hear the words aloud to believe this conversation was actually happening. It's not personal, Mom. It's about the overall vision and aesthetic. Carol has planned dozens of beautiful weddings for the families in her social circle, and she knows what works. She's generously offered to help us create something truly spectacular, something that will be featured in magazines. But that requires making some difficult decisions about who fits the image we're trying to create. I felt something break inside my chest, a pain so sharp and unexpected that I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. This was my only child, the daughter I had raised alone after her father left when she was 3, the girl I had sacrificed everything for without a moment's hesitation or regret. And she was telling me I wasn't good enough, wasn't young enough, wasn't stylish enough to stand beside her on the most important day of her life. "Jessica," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Do you hear what you're saying to me right now?" She shifted uncomfortably in her chair but didn't back down. "I knew you'd be upset, but I hoped you'd understand. This isn't about you personally. It's about creating the perfect day that Ryan and I will remember forever. Carol has access to vendors and resources that can make this wedding truly extraordinary, but it requires trusting her judgment about these decisions." "Her judgment," I repeated flatly. "Not yours. Her judgment about whether your own mother is suitable to be part of your wedding." Jessica's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady. "She has experience with these things, Mom. She knows what creates beautiful, timeless photos and what doesn't. She's trying to help us have the wedding of our dreams. And apparently, your dreams don't include me in any meaningful way." The hurt in my voice was impossible to hide, and I saw Jessica flinch slightly, though she quickly composed herself. "You're being dramatic. Of course you're invited. You'll still be there, still be part of the celebration, just not in a way that might compromise the overall aesthetic we're working to achieve. Carol thinks it would be best if you sat in the back during the ceremony, and maybe stepped out during the formal photo sessions." The suggestion was so insulting, so devastating, that I actually laughed, though the sound held no humor whatsoever. "Stepped out during photos, so that when you look back at your wedding album, there's no evidence that you had a mother at all." "That's not what I said," Jessica protested, but her tone lacked conviction. "It's exactly what you said. You want me to attend your wedding like a distant relative, someone insignificant enough that my presence won't interfere with your magazine-worthy aesthetic." I stood up from the table, needing to put some physical distance between us before I said something I might regret forever. Jessica remained seated, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I hoped you would be more understanding about this. It's one day, Mom. One day that's supposed to be perfect for Ryan and me. Is it really too much to ask for you to support our vision, even if it means stepping back a little?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that this conversation had revealed something fundamental about how my daughter viewed me, about how little she understood the depth of my love and sacrifice for her. She saw my hurt as selfishness, my desire to be part of her special day as an unreasonable demand that might interfere with her social aspirations. "Tell me something, Jessica," I said quietly, turning back to face her. "When you were 8 years old and you wanted to take dance lessons, who worked extra hours at the flower shop to pay for them?" She looked confused by the change in direction. "You did, but what does that have to do with—" "When you were in high school and you desperately wanted to go on that class trip to Europe, who took on a second job doing wedding arrangements on weekends to save up the money?" "Mom, I don't see why we're relitigating ancient history. When you were applying to colleges and you fell in love with Northwestern, who spent months researching financial aid options and scholarships, then worked overtime for 2 years to help pay for your tuition because you dreamed of studying journalism at a prestigious university?" Jessica's composure began to crack slightly. "I've always been grateful for everything you've done for me, but that doesn't mean—" "And when you called me crying at 2 a.m. during your senior year because you were overwhelmed with coursework and homesick, who drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring you your favorite homemade soup and stay with you until you felt better. Mom, please stop. I need you to understand something, Jessica. Every single sacrifice I made, every extra hour I worked, every dream I postponed or gave up entirely, I did gladly because you were my priority. You were always my priority. And now, on what should be one of the happiest days of both our lives, you're telling me that I'm an embarrassment, that my presence might ruin your perfect pictures. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tears were streaming down Jessica's face now, but she still didn't back down from her position. It's not about embarrassment. It's about having a cohesive vision for our wedding. Why can't you just support what makes Ryan and me happy? Because what makes you happy, apparently, is erasing me from the most important day of your life. I walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden I'd spent years cultivating, thinking about all the times Jessica had helped me plant flowers as a child, how proud she'd been when neighbors complimented the beautiful blooms we'd grown together. That's not fair, Jessica said behind me. I'm not erasing you. I'm just asking you to understand that this day isn't about you. I turned to face her one final time, something shifting inside me as I looked at this woman who had once been my entire world. You're absolutely right, Jessica. This day isn't about me. It's about you and Ryan and the life you're choosing to build together. And apparently, that life doesn't have room for a 62-year-old mother who might make your photos look dated. Mom, don't twist my words. I'm not twisting anything. I'm simply accepting what you've made very clear. You've chosen Carol Blake's opinion over any consideration for my feelings. You've decided that impressing her social circle matters more than honoring the woman who raised you. That's your choice to make, and I can't stop you from making it. Jessica stood up, her face flushed with anger and hurt. I came here hoping we could have a mature conversation about this, but you're determined to make me feel guilty for wanting my wedding to be perfect. Perfect, I repeated softly. Yes, I can see how having your mother visibly present might interfere with perfection. She grabbed her purse from the counter, her movements sharp with frustration. I'm not going to stand here and let you make me feel terrible for trying to plan the wedding of my dreams. When you're ready to have a rational discussion about this, when you're ready to be supportive instead of selfish, you can call me. The accusation of selfishness was the final straw. After everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, to be called selfish for wanting to be part of my daughter's wedding felt like a knife twisted in an old wound. I think it's best if you leave now, Jessica. She paused at the kitchen doorway, perhaps expecting me to call her back, to apologize for my reaction and agree to her terms. When I remained silent, she walked out, and I heard the front door close behind her with a finality that seemed to echo through my empty house. I sank back into my chair at the kitchen table, staring at the coffee mugs we'd left behind. Evidence of a conversation that had fundamentally altered our relationship. For the first time in 28 years, I wasn't sure how to fix things with my daughter. Wasn't sure if I even should try to fix them on her terms. What Jessica didn't know? What she couldn't possibly have imagined as she delivered her crushing assessment of my worth was that her dream venue, the exclusive Riverside Gardens where she planned to have her perfect magazine-worthy wedding, belonged to me. For 8 years, I had owned that property through my investment company, Harmony Holdings LLC, carefully keeping my ownership private while building it into one of the most sought-after wedding venues in Connecticut. The irony was almost too painful to contemplate. My daughter was willing to spend a fortune she didn't have on a venue owned by the mother she considered too old and unfashionable to be part of her wedding photos. She was planning to go into debt to rent a space that I could have given her as a gift, if only she had treated me with the basic respect and love I had spent a lifetime earning. But as I sat alone in my kitchen that afternoon, watching the shadows lengthen across the floors where Jessica had taken her first steps, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not call her back. I would not apologize for having feelings about being dismissed and diminished. And I would not reveal my ownership of Riverside Gardens until the moment when that revelation would mean the most. Jessica wanted a perfect wedding that reflected her values and priorities. She was about to discover exactly what those choices would cost her, and the price would be far higher than anything she had imagined when she walked out of my house that day, leaving behind not just her coffee mug, but the unconditional love and support she had taken for granted her entire life. As evening fell over Millbrook, I began making phone calls that would set in motion a series of events Jessica could never have anticipated. The wedding of her dreams was about to become a lesson in consequences, and I was finally ready to stop, being the mother who absorbed every slight, every dismissal, every moment of taking my love for granted without expecting anything in return. The game had changed, and Jessica had no idea that she had been playing against someone who held all the cards from the very beginning. Her perfect wedding was going to teach her the true value of the mother she had so casually discarded, and the lesson would be one she would never forget. The morning after Jessica's devastating visit, I woke before dawn feeling strangely clear-headed despite the emotional turmoil of the previous day. For the first time in decades, I wasn't immediately thinking about what Jessica might need from me or how I could smooth over our conflict. Instead, I found myself considering my own needs, my own worth, and what I deserved from the relationships in my life. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen where yesterday's conversation still seemed to linger in the air, then settled at my computer to review the financial reports from Riverside Gardens. The venue had been booked solid for the next 18 months, generating substantial revenue that had allowed me to live comfortably while maintaining the fiction that my modest floral shop was my primary source of income. The property had appreciated significantly since I'd purchased it 8 years ago, transforming from a neglected estate into one of Connecticut's most prestigious wedding destinations. The transformation hadn't happened overnight or without considerable effort on my part. When I'd first discovered the property, it was a crumbling Victorian mansion with overgrown gardens and a reputation for being unlucky in love. 3 previous owners had attempted to turn it into a wedding venue, each failing due to poor management, lack of vision, or insufficient capital to complete the necessary renovations. I had seen something different when I walked through those empty rooms, something that spoke to both my practical experience in the wedding industry and my romantic soul that still believed in happily ever after despite my own marriage's failure. Using the life insurance money from my ex-husband's death and every penny I had saved over 20 years of careful living, I had purchased the property through Harmony Holdings LLC, a company I'd established specifically to keep my real estate investments separate from my public identity. The secrecy hadn't been about shame or deception. It had been about protection. I'd learned early in life that people treated you differently when they knew you had money, and I'd wanted to maintain the genuine relationships I'd built based on who I was rather than what I owned. The renovation had taken 3 years and every ounce of creativity and determination I possessed. I'd worked alongside contractors during the day, then returned to my flower shop in the evenings to maintain my cover and generate the cash flow needed to fund the ongoing improvements. I'd researched historical preservation techniques, studied landscape design, and taught myself everything about running a luxury event venue. The result was a stunning property that could command premium prices while delivering an experience that made every couple feel like royalty on their wedding day. Marcus Rodriguez, the venue manager I'd hired to be the public face of Riverside Gardens, was one of only 3 people who knew my true identity as the owner. A former hotel manager with impeccable credentials and a gift for creating magical experiences, Marcus had been instrumental in building the venue's reputation and maintaining the discretion I required. When couples toured the facility, they dealt with Marcus and his team. When vendors needed approval for changes or upgrades, they contacted Marcus. The arrangement had worked perfectly for 8 years, allowing me to remain anonymous while building a highly successful business. Now, as I scrolled through the booking calendar, I found Jessica's wedding date circled in red with multiple exclamation points. Marcus had sent me several emails over the past few months expressing his excitement about the Patterson-Blake wedding, calling it the most elaborate celebration they'd ever been asked to coordinate. The budget was astronomical by my daughter's standards, representing what I estimated to be her entire savings, plus substantial loans she'd apparently taken out to fund her dream day. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus, needing to hear the details of what Jessica had planned for the venue I'd spent years perfecting. "Linda, good morning," Marcus answered warmly. "I was actually going to call you later today. We've got some interesting developments with the Patterson-Blake wedding that I wanted to discuss." "What kind of developments?" I asked, settling back in my chair with my coffee. The bride's future mother-in-law, Carol Blake, has been increasingly involved in the planning process. She's requested several upgrades that would significantly increase the cost, and she's been quite demanding about specific vendors and arrangements. Yesterday, she called to schedule a meeting for this afternoon to discuss what she called elevating the event to an appropriate level of sophistication. I felt a familiar knot of tension form in my stomach. Carol's involvement in Jessica's wedding planning had already cost me my relationship with my daughter. Now it seemed she was pushing Jessica toward even more extravagant expenses, probably as a way of demonstrating her own importance and social status. "What kinds of upgrades is she requesting?" I asked. "Additional floral arrangements? Premium linens? Upgraded lighting packages? A larger bridal suite? And she wants to bring in her own event coordinator to work alongside our team." She also mentioned something about ensuring the aesthetic meets certain photographic standards, which apparently requires specific positioning of decorative elements and more elaborate staging for the ceremony. The mention of photographic standards made my chest tighten with renewed hurt. Jessica was willing to go into debt to create the perfect backdrop for photos that wouldn't include her own mother, all at the suggestion of a woman who had made it clear from day one that I wasn't good enough for her social circle. "Marcus, I need you to schedule a separate meeting with me before you meet with Mrs. Blake today. There are some things about this particular wedding that we need to discuss." "Of course, is everything all right? You sound concerned." "Let's just say the situation has become more complicated than usual. Can you meet me at the venue at noon? I want to walk through the property and review the current plans before Mrs. Blake arrives for her appointment." After hanging up, I spent the morning at Patterson Floral Design, my legitimate business that had served as both my passion and my cover for nearly 15 years. The shop was located in downtown Millbrook's historic district, occupying the ground floor of a charming brick building that had once housed a bakery. The space was filled with the colors and fragrances of fresh flowers, from delicate orchids to robust sunflowers, creating an atmosphere that had always brought me peace and joy. Helen Foster, my longtime friend and part-time employee, was arranging centerpieces for a local restaurant when I arrived. Helen was one of the few people who knew about my ownership of Riverside Gardens, having been my confidant and advisor throughout the purchase and renovation process. She'd also been a witness to Jessica's gradual transformation from a loving daughter into someone who seemed increasingly influenced by status and appearances. "You look terrible," Helen said bluntly as I walked through the door. "What happened? With Jessica yesterday? You mentioned she was coming over to discuss wedding plans." I filled Helen in on the devastating conversation, watching her expression shift from surprise to outrage as I recounted Jessica's suggestion that I step out of photos to avoid compromising the aesthetic of her wedding. "That girl has lost her mind," Helen said flatly, setting down her pruning shears with enough force to make me wince. "After everything you've done for her, everything you've sacrificed, she's worried about how you'll look in her precious photos?" Carol Blake has been whispering in her ear for months, convincing her that image and social status are more important than family relationships. Jessica used to roll her eyes at that kind of thinking, but somewhere along the way, she started buying into it. And now she's planning to bankrupt herself for a wedding at a venue you own. A venue you could have given her for free if she'd just treated you with basic human decency. The irony isn't lost on me, I admitted. But I haven't decided what to do with that information yet. Helen gave me a look that I'd learned to recognize over our 20-year friendship, the expression that meant she was about to offer advice whether I wanted it or not. Linda, you've spent Jessica's entire life putting her needs ahead of your own. You've absorbed every slight, overlooked every moment of taking you for granted, and made excuses for behavior that would be unacceptable from a stranger, much less your own child. Maybe it's time she learned that actions have consequences. She's still my daughter, Helen. Despite everything, I love her. Love doesn't mean being a doormat. Love sometimes means letting people face the natural consequences of their choices so they can learn and grow from them. Jessica has chosen to prioritize Carol Blake's opinion over your feelings, chosen to value social status over family relationships, chosen to treat you as disposable when you no longer serve her immediate purposes. Those choices should have consequences. As much as I wanted to defend Jessica, I couldn't argue with Helen's assessment. My daughter had made it clear that my role in her life was conditional, dependent on my ability to enhance rather than detract from her image and social aspirations. The unconditional love and support I'd provided for nearly 3 decades was apparently not enough to earn me a place of honor at her wedding. I left the flower shop at 11:30 and drove to Riverside Gardens, taking the winding country road that led to the property I'd fallen in love with so many years ago. The estate sat on 12 acres of meticulously maintained grounds, with the restored Victorian mansion serving as the centerpiece of a complex that included formal gardens, a chapel, reception facilities, and accommodations for wedding parties. Every detail had been carefully planned to create an atmosphere of elegance and romance, from the hand-carved wooden details on the mansion's exterior to the crystal chandeliers that graced the main ballroom. Marcus was waiting for me in the main office, a converted library that still retained its original mahogany shelving and leather-bound volumes. The room served as both a functional workspace and a showpiece that impressed prospective clients with its old-world charm and attention to detail. "Linda, you look stressed," Marcus observed as I settled into the chair across from his desk. "What's going on with the Patterson-Blake wedding that has you so concerned?" I took a deep breath, then told Marcus something I'd never shared with him before, something that would change how he viewed not just this particular event but our entire working relationship. "Marcus, I need to tell you something about the bride. Jessica Patterson is my daughter." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus stared at me with the expression of someone trying to reconcile 2 completely different pieces of information. That didn't seem to fit together logically. "Your daughter is getting married here, and you didn't tell me?" he finally asked. "My daughter is getting married here without knowing that I own the venue. She's also made it clear that she considers me too old and unfashionable to be part of her wedding in any meaningful way. She wants me to sit in the back during the ceremony and step out during photo sessions, so I don't compromise the aesthetic she's trying to achieve." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing this information with the same careful attention he applied to coordinating complex events. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your daughter, who doesn't know you own this venue, has chosen to spend a fortune she doesn't have on a wedding here, while simultaneously telling you that you're not worthy to be prominently included in the celebration." That's an accurate summary. And her future mother-in-law, who I'm meeting with this afternoon, is the one pushing for all these expensive upgrades and aesthetic requirements that apparently exclude you from your own daughter's wedding photos. Carol Blake has made it clear from the beginning that she considers me beneath her social standards. She's apparently convinced Jessica that having a working-class mother visible in wedding photos will somehow diminish the overall impact of the day. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, his expression thoughtful as he considered the implications of what I'd shared. "Linda, in all the years I've worked with you, I've never seen you treat anyone unfairly or use your position as owner to manipulate situations for personal gain. But this is different. This is your own daughter dismissing and disrespecting you while planning to spend money she doesn't have on a venue you own. What do you want to do? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that Marcus was offering me something I'd never had before in my relationship with Jessica: the power to set the terms rather than simply accepting whatever conditions were offered to me. I want to attend Mrs. Blake's meeting this afternoon, I said slowly. I want to hear exactly what she's planning for my daughter's wedding, what additional expenses she's encouraging Jessica to take on, and how she justifies excluding the bride's mother from the celebration. But I want to attend as the owner of Riverside Gardens, not as Jessica's dismissed parent. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That would certainly change the dynamic of the conversation. Mrs. Blake has been quite demanding in her interactions with our staff, apparently assuming that her social status gives her the right to make unreasonable requests and speak condescendingly to service providers. She might be surprised to discover that the venue owner has opinions about how her event should be managed. I've spent 8 years building this venue's reputation for excellence and elegance. I won't allow anyone, including my daughter's future mother-in-law, to turn it into a showcase for social climbing and family exclusion. If Carol Blake wants to use my property to demonstrate her superiority over people she considers beneath her, she's going to discover that some people can't be dismissed as easily as she thinks. We spent the next hour reviewing the current wedding plans, walking through the ceremony and reception spaces, and discussing the additional upgrades Carol had requested. The total cost of Jessica's wedding, including the new additions Carol was pushing for, would exceed $80,000, a sum that would require Jessica to take out additional loans and potentially mortgage her financial future for years to come. As we concluded our tour, Marcus asked the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Linda, what do you want the outcome of this afternoon's meeting to be? Are you hoping to repair your relationship with Jessica, or are you looking to teach her a lesson about treating family with respect? I stood in the main ballroom where Jessica planned to dance her first dance as a married woman, surrounded by the beauty I'd created through years of hard work and careful planning. The space was magnificent, from the restored hardwood floors to the period-appropriate fixtures that cast warm light across elegant furnishings. It was exactly the kind of venue Jessica had dreamed of since she was a little girl, and I could have given it to her as a gift if she'd simply valued our relationship enough to include me in her special day. I want Jessica to understand that actions have consequences, I said finally. She's chosen to prioritize social status over family loyalty, chosen to exclude me from her wedding rather than risk Carol Blake's disapproval. Those choices should cost her something more than just the loss of my unconditional support. Maybe when she realizes what she's actually given up in exchange for Carol's approval, she'll reconsider what truly matters in life. Marcus nodded, understanding the complexity of my position. Then we'll handle this afternoon's meeting accordingly. Mrs. Blake is expecting to meet with the venue manager to discuss her additional requirements. Instead, she'll be meeting with the venue owner, who has some very specific opinions about how her daughter's wedding should be conducted. As I drove home that afternoon to prepare for the confrontation that would change everything, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and sadness. I was about to reveal a secret I'd kept for 8 years, about to assert power I'd never used for personal gain, about to demonstrate to my daughter and her future mother-in-law that dismissing people based on social status could have unexpected consequences. The woman who had spent decades prioritizing everyone else's needs above her own was about to discover what it felt like to hold all the cards in a game she'd never chosen to play, but was finally ready to win. At 3 o'clock sharp, Carol Blake's silver Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway of Riverside Gardens with the confidence of someone accustomed to making grand entrances. I watched from the window of Marcus's office as she emerged from her vehicle, wearing a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and carrying herself with the practiced poise of someone who believed the world existed to accommodate her preferences. What surprised me was seeing Jessica climb out of the passenger seat. My daughter looked nervous, constantly smoothing her hair and adjusting her purse strap as she followed Carol toward the main entrance. She wore a simple navy dress that I recognized from our shopping trip 2 years ago, when she'd been worried about overspending on work clothes. The contrast between her modest attire and Carol's obvious luxury was stark, a visual reminder of the economic gulf between our families that Carol never let anyone forget. Marcus straightened his tie and checked his watch. "Are you ready for this, Linda? Once we do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with Jessica will never be the same." I took a deep breath, thinking about all the times I'd bitten my tongue when Carol made condescending remarks about my work, my home, my lifestyle. I thought about Jessica's face yesterday when she'd told me I was too old for her wedding photos, the casual cruelty of dismissing someone who had given her everything. I'm ready. Let's see how Mrs. Blake responds when she realizes she can't simply override the wishes of people she considers beneath her. We walked to the main reception area, where Carol and Jessica were examining the grand staircase that curved elegantly up to the second-floor bridal suites. Carol was gesturing animatedly while Jessica nodded along, clearly trying to absorb whatever wisdom her future mother-in-law was dispensing about proper wedding etiquette. "Mrs. Blake, Miss Patterson, welcome back to Riverside Gardens," Marcus said smoothly, extending his hand in greeting. "I believe you've met our venue manager before, but I'd like you to meet the property owner, Linda Patterson." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally something that might have been panic. Carol, however, simply looked puzzled, as if she couldn't quite process why the venue owner shared the same last name as the bride. "Patterson," Carol repeated slowly, her sharp gaze moving between Jessica and me. "That's quite a coincidence. Are you related to the bride?" "I'm Jessica's mother," I said calmly, watching both women's reactions carefully. "I've owned Riverside Gardens for 8 years through my investment company, Harmony Holdings LLC. Jessica made a sound that was part gasp, part whimper. "Mom, what are you talking about? You own a flower shop. You can't possibly own this place." "I own both," I replied evenly. "The flower shop has always been my passion, but it was never my only source of income. I've been quite successful in real estate investment, though I've chosen to keep that part of my life private." Carol's expression had shifted from puzzlement to suspicion to something approaching alarm as the implications began to sink in. "You're telling me that Jessica's mother, a small-town florist, secretly owns one of Connecticut's most exclusive wedding venues? I'm telling you that Jessica's mother has built a successful business empire while maintaining the modest lifestyle that apparently embarrasses her daughter and future mother-in-law." My voice remained calm, but I could feel the steel beneath my words. The same mother who was deemed too old and unfashionable to be prominently featured in the wedding photos at her own property. Jessica's face had gone completely white. "Mom, I had no idea. You never said anything about owning real estate or having money. Why didn't you tell me?" "When would I have told you, Jessica? During the conversation where you informed me that my presence might compromise your wedding's aesthetic. Or perhaps during one of the many times Carol has made it clear that my working-class background is an embarrassment to your engagement." Carol had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now she seemed to recover her composure and her characteristic sense of entitlement. "Well, this is certainly an unexpected development, but it doesn't change the fact that we have a wedding to plan and specific standards to maintain. Regardless of who owns the venue, we still need to ensure that everything is executed properly." The audacity of her response left me momentarily speechless. Even faced with the revelation that she'd been condescending to the owner of the property she desperately wanted to use, Carol was still attempting to maintain her position of superiority. "I see," I said slowly. "So you believe that discovering I'm not just Jessica's embarrassing mother, but also the owner of this venue doesn't change anything about your approach to planning this wedding? Family dynamics are family dynamics. Carol replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. Business is business. Jessica and Ryan have contracted for services here, and we expect those services to be delivered according to our specifications, regardless of any personal relationships that might complicate the situation. Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. Mrs. Blake, perhaps we should discuss those specifications in detail. I understand you've requested several upgrades and additions to the original wedding package. Carol brightened, apparently relieved to return to her role as the sophisticated mother-in-law orchestrating a perfect celebration. Yes, I've prepared a comprehensive list of enhancements that will elevate this event to the level of sophistication that Ryan's family expects. We'll need premium floral arrangements throughout the property, not just in the ceremony and reception areas. The current lighting package is adequate, but needs supplementation with professional photography lighting to ensure the images meet editorial standards. She pulled out a leather portfolio and began reading from typed notes. We'll require upgraded linens in ivory silk rather than the standard cotton blend, crystal charger plates for all guests rather than the ceramic options, and premium bar service with top-shelf liquors exclusively. The bridal suite needs redecorating with more contemporary furnishings, and we'll need to bring in our own event coordinator to work alongside your staff to ensure proper execution. Jessica remained silent throughout Carol's presentation, but I could see the growing panic in her eyes as she realized the financial implications of these additions. Each item Carol mentioned represented hundreds or thousands of dollars in additional costs, expenses that would push the total wedding bill well beyond anything my daughter could reasonably afford. Mrs. Blake? I interjected quietly. I'm curious about your reasoning for these particular upgrades. Could you explain why they're necessary for Jessica and Ryan's celebration? Carol's smile had a patronizing quality that made my teeth ache. Linda, dear, I understand that your experience is primarily in the flower business, but planning a high-society wedding requires a certain level of sophistication that might not be immediately apparent to someone from your background. These enhancements aren't arbitrary luxuries. They're essential elements for creating the kind of event that reflects well on both families. The condescension in her voice was breathtaking, made even more remarkable by the fact that she was speaking to the owner of the venue while requesting upgrades that would cost more than many people's annual salaries. I see, I said calmly. And these editorial standard photographs that require special lighting, those are the same photos that Jessica has decided shouldn't include her mother because my presence might compromise the aesthetic? Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Mom, please don't do this. Not here. Not now. Don't do what, Jessica? Don't point out the hypocrisy of spending money you don't have to create perfect photos that deliberately exclude the person who made your entire wedding possible. Don't mention that you're planning to go into debt for upgrades suggested by someone who has been consistently disrespectful to your family. Carol's face had begun to flush, a sure sign that her carefully maintained composure was starting to crack. I hardly think my suggestions about creating a beautiful wedding constitute disrespect toward anyone. I'm simply trying to help Jessica and Ryan have the celebration they deserve. The celebration they deserve, I repeated thoughtfully. Tell me, Mrs. Blake, what exactly do you think Jessica deserves? Does she deserve to start her marriage deeply in debt because you convinced her that standard linens and ceramic plates weren't good enough for your family's standards? Does she deserve to exclude her own mother from her wedding photos because you're embarrassed by my age and social status? That's not what I said, Jessica protested weakly, though we all knew it was exactly what she'd said the day before. Isn't it? Let me refresh your memory, sweetheart. You told me that having older people in prominent roles might date the photos and detract from the modern aesthetic you were going for. You said Carol recommended that I attend as a regular guest, rather than having a special position because I didn't fit the vision you were trying to create. Marcus had been taking notes throughout this conversation, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes alert to every nuance of what was clearly becoming a family confrontation rather than a business meeting. Carol straightened her shoulders. and assumed the voice she probably used when addressing service staff who had displeased her. Linda, I think you're overreacting to suggestions that were meant to help Jessica have the perfect wedding day. If you're going to take every planning decision personally, perhaps it would be better if you stepped back and allowed people with more experience to handle the arrangements. The suggestion that I step back from my own daughter's wedding, being held at my own venue, while paying for upgrades I could have provided for free if I'd simply been treated with basic respect, was so outrageous that I actually laughed. Mrs. Blake, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about our respective positions in this situation. You seem to believe that you're the client, and I'm the service provider who should defer to your wishes regardless of how unreasonable they might be. But the reality is quite different. I turned to Marcus, who nodded slightly to indicate his understanding of what I was about to do. Marcus, please pull up the contract for the Patterson-Blake wedding. I'd like to review the terms with our clients. Marcus opened his laptop and accessed the booking system, then turned the screen so both Jessica and Carol could see the detailed contract that outlined every aspect of their wedding arrangements. As you can see, I continued, this contract was signed by Jessica Patterson and Ryan Blake, with Jessica listed as the primary contact and financial responsible party. The total cost, including the upgrades that have been added over the past several weeks, currently stands at $87,000. Jessica made a strangled sound when she saw the total, clearly not having realized how much Carol's suggestions had increased the overall cost. Now, Mrs. Blake, since you seem to believe you have the authority to make decisions about how this wedding should be conducted, I'd like to understand what gives you that authority. Are you financially responsible for any portion of this celebration? Carol's face had gone from flushed to pale as she realized the trap she'd walked into. Well, no, but as Ryan's mother, I naturally want to contribute my expertise to ensure the event is properly managed. Your expertise, I repeated. And what exactly qualifies as expertise in this context? Have you ever planned a wedding for $87,000? Have you ever managed an event at a venue of this caliber? Have you ever been responsible for coordinating vendors, timelines, and logistics for a celebration of this magnitude? The silence that followed was answer enough. Carol's expertise consisted entirely of attending expensive events planned by other people and criticizing the details that didn't meet her standards. I thought not. So what we have here is a situation where someone with no financial stake in the event and no actual experience in event planning has convinced my daughter to nearly double the cost of her wedding while simultaneously suggesting that the bride's mother should be excluded from the celebration. Jessica was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand while staring at the contract that represented more money than she made in 2 years. Mom, I can't afford this, she whispered. I thought maybe I could make the payments work, but seeing it all written out like this, I can't afford any of it. Carol shot Jessica a sharp look that clearly conveyed her displeasure at this admission of financial limitations. Jessica, dear, we've discussed this. Sometimes significant life events require sacrifices and creative financing. You can't put a price on the perfect wedding day. Actually, Mrs. Blake, we can put a price on it. The price is $87,000 plus interest on whatever loans Jessica would need to take out to pay for your vision of perfection. The question is whether that price is worth Jessica starting her marriage in crushing debt while excluding the people who actually love and support her. I walked to the large windows that overlooked the gardens where Jessica had wanted her ceremony to take place, thinking about all the brides who had stood in this spot over the years, radiant with happiness as they prepared to marry the people they loved. How many of them had been encouraged to prioritize image over substance, expense over meaning, social status over family relationships? When I turned back to face the 3 people who had been waiting in uncomfortable silence, I had made my decision about how this confrontation would end. Jessica, I'm going to make you an offer, but it comes with conditions that are non-negotiable. I will provide Riverside Gardens for your wedding at no charge. I will personally handle all the floral arrangements as my gift to you. I will ensure that your day is beautiful and memorable and everything you've dreamed it could be." Jessica's face lit up with hope and relief, but I held up a hand to indicate I wasn't finished. "However, if you accept this gift, you accept it on my terms. There will be no editorial lighting, no premium upgrades designed to impress people who don't matter, no excluding family members to satisfy someone else's aesthetic preferences. You will have a beautiful, elegant wedding that celebrates your love for Ryan and honors the relationships that have supported you throughout your life." Carol looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. "You can't be serious. After all the planning we've done, all the careful consideration that's gone into creating the perfect event, you want to just throw that all away for some sentimental notion about family inclusion?" "Mrs. Blake, the only thing I'm throwing away is the delusion that your opinion matters more than my daughter's financial future and emotional well-being. Jessica can choose to accept my gift and have a wedding that's both beautiful and affordable, or she can continue with your plans and start her marriage buried under debt that will take years to repay." Jessica looked back and forth between Carol and me, the weight of decision visible in her expression. For a moment, I thought she might choose Carol's expensive vision over my practical offer, might decide that social status was worth more than financial security or family relationships. Then she looked at the contract again, at the number that represented more money than she could reasonably pay back in the next decade, and something shifted in her expression. "Carol, I appreciate everything you've tried to do to help make this wedding special, but my mom is right. I can't afford these upgrades, and I can't start my marriage with this kind of debt hanging over our heads." Carol's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Jessica, dear, I think you're making a mistake. This is your one chance to have the wedding of your dreams, to create memories that will last a lifetime. Once you compromise on these details, you'll regret it forever." "The wedding of my dreams," Jessica repeated slowly, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Includes my mother standing beside me, not hiding in the back row to satisfy someone else's idea of what looks appropriate in photographs." The admission hit me like a physical blow, not of pain this time, but of relief so profound I had to steady myself against the window frame. For the first time since this nightmare began, Jessica was choosing our relationship over Carol's approval. But Carol wasn't finished fighting for control of the situation she'd spent months orchestrating. "Jessica, if you accept this offer, you're allowing your mother to manipulate you through financial pressure. That's not healthy family dynamics, that's emotional blackmail." The accusation was so backwards, so completely divorced from reality, that I had to admire Carol's ability to reframe the situation in a way that cast her as the victim and me as the manipulator. "Mrs. Blake," I said quietly, "the only manipulation happening here has been your months-long campaign to convince my daughter that I'm an embarrassment to be hidden away while she spends money she doesn't have on upgrades designed to impress your social circle. If offering to give Jessica the wedding venue for free in exchange for being treated with basic respect constitutes manipulation, then I'm guilty as charged." The moment Jessica chose me over Carol's extravagant vision, something fundamental shifted in the room's atmosphere. Carol's carefully maintained facade of sophisticated control began to crack, revealing the entitled, manipulative woman beneath the designer clothes and polished mannerisms. "Jessica, you're making the biggest mistake of your life," Carol said, her voice taking on a sharp edge that cut through her usual honeyed tones. "Do you really think your mother's charity comes without strings attached? She's using her financial position to control your wedding, to force you to include her in ways that will compromise everything we've worked to create." Jessica looked genuinely torn, glancing between Carol and me with the expression of someone caught between two competing loyalties. I could see the years of conditioning Carol had imposed warring with her growing awareness of the financial reality she faced. "Carol, I understand you want the best for Ryan and me, but I have to be practical. $87,000 is more than I make in 2 years. Even with payment plans and loans, I'd be paying for this wedding for the next decade. Some things are worth the investment, Carol insisted, her desperation beginning to show through her composed exterior. This is your wedding day, the most important day of your life. You can't put a price tag on perfection, and you certainly can't allow financial considerations to compromise the standards that Ryan's family expects. The mention of Ryan's family expectations was clearly meant to remind Jessica of her obligations as the future Mrs. Blake, but it had the opposite effect than Carol intended. Jessica's expression hardened slightly, and I saw a flash of the independent young woman I'd raised before Carol's influence had begun shaping her priorities. "What exactly are Ryan's family expectations?" Jessica asked quietly. "Because Ryan has never said anything to me about needing premium linens or crystal charger plates. He's never mentioned wanting his mother-in-law excluded from our wedding photos. And he's certainly never suggested that we should go into debt to impress people." Carol's face flushed again, but this time with anger rather than embarrassment. "Ryan may not vocalize these expectations, dear, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. There are standards in our social circle, standards that reflect on the entire family. When you marry Ryan, you're not just joining our family, you're accepting the responsibilities that come with being part of our community." "And what responsibilities are those?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "The responsibility to exclude family members who don't meet your aesthetic requirements? The responsibility to go into crushing debt to maintain appearances? The responsibility to prioritize your approval over her own judgment and financial security?" Carol turned her full attention to me, and for the first time since this confrontation began, I saw her true feelings about me and my place in Jessica's life laid bare. "Linda, I've tried to be diplomatic about this situation, but since you insist on making this personal, let me be completely honest. Jessica is marrying into a family with standards, connections, and social obligations that extend far beyond what you might understand from your background. This wedding isn't just a celebration, it's an introduction of Jessica to our community, and first impressions matter enormously." She paused, gathering herself for what was clearly intended to be a devastating attack on my worthiness as Jessica's mother. "You may own this venue through some business arrangement I don't pretend to understand, but that doesn't change the fact that you're a small-town florist who raised Jessica alone under circumstances that were less than ideal. I'm not saying that's your fault, but it is your reality. Jessica has an opportunity to elevate herself, to become part of something bigger and more sophisticated than her origins might suggest. My suggestions about the wedding arrangements, including the photography considerations, were meant to help her make that transition successfully." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing he were anywhere else but witnessing this family destruction. Jessica's face had gone white again, but this time with what looked like dawning horror at what Carol had just revealed about her true feelings. I felt surprisingly calm as I processed Carol's words, her casual dismissal of my life and Jessica's upbringing, her assumption that my daughter needed to be elevated beyond her origins to be worthy of her son. The hurt was there, sharp and deep, but it was overwhelmed by a clarity I hadn't felt in months. "Thank you for your honesty, Carol," I said quietly. "It's helpful to understand exactly what you think of me and my daughter. You see Jessica as a project that needs improvement, someone whose background is an embarrassment that needs to be carefully managed and potentially hidden to make her acceptable to your social circle." "That's not what I said," Carol protested. But her voice lacked conviction. "It's exactly what you said. You believe Jessica needs to be elevated beyond her origins, which means you consider those origins something shameful. You think her upbringing was less than ideal, which means you disapprove of how I raised her as a single mother. You're concerned about first impressions when introducing her to your community, which means you're worried that her association with me will reflect poorly on your family." Jessica had been listening to this exchange with growing distress, but now she found her voice again, and when she spoke, there was a strength in it that reminded me of the confident young woman she'd been before Carol's influence had begun undermining her self-worth. "Carol, is that really how you see me? As someone who needs to be elevated and improved to be worthy of your family?" Carol seemed to realize she'd revealed too much, gone too far in her honest assessment of the situation. "Jessica, dear, I didn't mean to imply that you need improvement. I simply meant that marriage involves transitions, adjustments to new social circumstances that can be challenging to navigate. But you did mean to imply that my mother is an embarrassment who needs to be hidden away so I can make a good impression on your friends." "I never used the word embarrassment," Carol said defensively. "You didn't have to. Your meaning was clear enough." Jessica turned to look at me, and I saw tears in her eyes, but also something that looked like the beginning of understanding. "Mom, I owe you an apology. A huge apology. I've been so focused on trying to fit into Carol's world that I lost sight of what actually matters." The admission was more than I had dared to hope for, but I could see that Carol wasn't ready to concede defeat. She'd spent months cultivating influence over Jessica's decisions, and she wasn't about to lose that influence without a fight. "Jessica, you're upset right now, and rightfully so. This has been a stressful conversation for everyone involved. But don't make decisions about your future based on temporary emotions. Think about what you're giving up if you accept your mother's offer. Think about the opportunities you'll be closing off, the connections you'll be severing, the impression you'll be making on people who could be important to your future." The veiled threat was unmistakable. Carol was suggesting that choosing me over her expensive vision would have social consequences for Jessica, that she might find herself excluded from the Blake family's circle if she didn't prioritize their expectations over her own judgment. "What kind of connections require me to exclude my own mother from my wedding?" Jessica asked. "What kind of opportunities are worth starting my marriage in debt? What kind of people would think less of me for choosing financial responsibility and family loyalty over expensive decorations?" Carol's expression grew desperate as she realized she was losing control of the narrative she'd spent months constructing. "You're not seeing the bigger picture, Jessica. This isn't just about one day or one event. This is about setting the tone for your entire marriage, for your place in Ryan's family and social circle. If you compromise on these standards now, it sends a message about what you're willing to accept, what level of quality you expect from your life." "The message I want to send," Jessica said firmly, "is that I value substance over appearance, family over social status, and financial responsibility over impressing people who would judge me based on my wedding decorations." I felt a surge of pride at Jessica's words, but Carol wasn't finished with her attempts to regain control of the situation. "Fine," Carol said, her voice taking on a cold, calculated tone. "If that's truly how you feel, then perhaps you should also consider whether Ryan shares those values. Because I can tell you right now that his family has certain expectations, and if you're not willing to meet them, there may be consequences for your relationship that extend far beyond this wedding." The threat was now explicit rather than veiled. Carol was suggesting that Jessica's relationship with Ryan might be in jeopardy if she didn't comply with the Blake family's demands for an expensive, socially appropriate wedding that excluded me from prominent participation. Jessica stared at Carol for a long moment, and I could see her processing not just the words, but the implications of what she was hearing. This was the woman who had been advising her for months, supposedly helping her plan the perfect wedding, but who was now threatening her engagement if she didn't prioritize appearances over her own values and financial security. "Are you telling me that Ryan would break our engagement if I don't spend money I don't have on wedding upgrades you've suggested?" Jessica asked quietly. Carol seemed to realize she'd overplayed her hand, gone too far in her desperation to maintain control. "Of course not, dear. Ryan loves you. But marriages succeed when both families support the union, and family support often depends on feeling respected and valued. If you dismiss everything I've tried to contribute to your wedding planning, It might send the wrong message about how you value your new family relationships. The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. Carol was simultaneously denying that she'd threatened Jessica's engagement while reinforcing the threat through suggestions about family support and respect. She was making Jessica's choice to prioritize financial responsibility and family loyalty sound like disrespect toward the Blake family. But Jessica had apparently heard enough. She stood up from her chair with a decisiveness that surprised everyone in the room, including me. "Carol, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. If I accept my mother's generous offer to provide the venue and flowers for my wedding at no charge, if I choose to have a beautiful but modest celebration that includes my mother in all the photos and honors the woman who raised me and sacrificed everything for my happiness, would you and Ryan's family consider that disrespectful?" Carol's hesitation before answering told us everything we needed to know, but she attempted to maintain her diplomatic facade even as her true position became clear. "Jessica, I would hate to see you make choices that you might regret later. Choices that might impact your relationships with people who want to support your marriage." "That's not what I asked," Jessica said firmly. "I asked if you would consider it disrespectful if I chose to honor my mother and prioritize financial responsibility over expensive decorations." Another long pause, during which Carol seemed to be calculating whether honesty or continued manipulation would better serve her purposes. "I think," Carol said carefully, "that how you handle this situation will tell us a great deal about your priorities and your commitment to being part of our family." Jessica nodded slowly, as if Carol's non-answer had provided all the clarity she needed. "Then let me tell you about my priorities," Jessica said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "My priority is marrying the man I love without starting our life together buried under debt. My priority is honoring the woman who worked multiple jobs to put me through college, who sacrificed her own comfort to give me every opportunity, who has loved me unconditionally for 28 years. My priority is having a wedding that celebrates love and family and commitment, not social status and appearances." She turned to face me directly, tears streaming down her cheeks but her voice steady and clear. "Mom, I accept your offer. I would be honored to have my wedding at Riverside Gardens, and I would be even more honored to have you standing beside me, prominently featured in every photo, celebrated as the amazing mother you've always been." The relief and joy that flooded through me was so intense I had to sit down to avoid collapsing. After months of feeling dismissed and devalued, after yesterday's devastating conversation about being too old for my daughter's wedding, Jessica was choosing me, choosing us, choosing the relationship we'd built over 28 years of love and sacrifice. But Carol wasn't ready to accept defeat. Her carefully constructed plan to orchestrate Jessica's wedding according to her own vision and social requirements was crumbling, and her response revealed the entitled, controlling person she'd always been beneath her polished exterior. "Jessica, if this is truly your decision, then I need to make something very clear. The Blake family has certain standards and expectations, and if you're not willing to meet them, there will be consequences. I can't force you to make the right choice, but I can ensure that you understand what you're giving up." The threat was now completely explicit, and Marcus, who had been professionally silent throughout this confrontation, finally felt compelled to intervene. "Mrs. Blake, I think this conversation has moved beyond wedding planning into personal family matters. That might be better discussed privately. Perhaps we should schedule separate meetings to handle the practical details of the event." But Carol was beyond diplomatic solutions or professional mediation. She had invested too much time and energy in controlling Jessica's wedding plans to simply walk away gracefully when her influence was being rejected. "Marcus, I appreciate your attempt to be helpful, but this is exactly the kind of situation that requires clear communication about expectations and consequences. Jessica needs to understand that her choices will affect not just her wedding day, but her entire future with our family. Jessica wiped her tears and looked directly at Carol with an expression I hadn't seen from her in years. The look of someone who had finally recognized manipulation for what it was and refused to tolerate it any longer. Carol, let me make something very clear. If Ryan's love for me is conditional on my willingness to go into debt for a wedding that excludes my mother, then maybe I need to reconsider whether I want to marry into a family with those kinds of values. If your support for our marriage depends on my prioritizing your social expectations over my own judgment and financial security, then maybe your support isn't worth having. The silence that followed was profound. Carol stared at Jessica as if she'd never seen her before, as if the compliant young woman she'd been molding for months had suddenly been replaced by someone with independent thoughts and unshakable principles. Finally, Carol gathered her purse and stood up with the rigid dignity of someone who had been thoroughly defeated, but refused to acknowledge it. I can see that you've made your decision, Jessica. I hope you don't come to regret it. But I want you to know that this conversation will have consequences beyond what you might anticipate. The Blake family values loyalty and respect, and your choices today will be remembered. With that final attempt at intimidation, Carol walked out of Riverside Gardens, her high heels clicking against the marble floors with sharp, angry sounds that echoed through the beautiful space I'd spent years creating. After she left, the three of us sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened and what it meant for Jessica's future. My daughter had just chosen family over social status, love over appearances, financial responsibility over keeping up with people who would never truly accept her anyway. But she had also potentially sacrificed her relationship with her future in-laws, and possibly with Ryan himself, depending on how deeply he shared his mother's values and expectations. As if reading my thoughts, Jessica pulled out her phone, with trembling hands. "I need to call Ryan," she said quietly. "I need to tell him what just happened and find out whether his mother speaks for him or whether we have a future together that's based on love rather than social expectations." The next few minutes would determine not just the fate of Jessica's wedding, but the fate of her engagement and her entire future. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I found myself praying that I hadn't just helped my daughter make the biggest mistake of her life. Jessica's hands shook as she dialed Ryan's number, and I could see the fear in her eyes as she waited for him to answer. This phone call would determine everything, whether she would move forward with a wedding that honored our relationship, or whether she would lose the man she loved because of her decision to stand up to his mother. "Ryan?" Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper when he picked up. "I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come to Riverside Gardens right now? Something happened with your mother, and I need to know where you stand on some things that are really important to me." I couldn't hear Ryan's response, but whatever he said made Jessica's face relax slightly. "Okay, I'll wait for you here. And Ryan? I love you, but I need you to know that I've made some decisions today that your mother isn't happy about." After she hung up, Jessica looked at me with an expression that mixed determination with vulnerability. "Mom, what if he chooses our side? What if Carol was right about the Blake family having expectations I can't meet?" Marcus, who had been discreetly reviewing paperwork while giving us privacy for this family moment, looked up with the kind of gentle wisdom that comes from years of watching couples navigate family pressures during wedding planning. "Jessica, if I may offer some perspective from someone who's seen hundreds of couples go through this process, the marriages that last are the ones where both partners prioritize their relationship with each other over the expectations of extended family. If Ryan truly loves you, he'll support your decision to honor your mother and choose financial responsibility over social status. But what if he doesn't understand? What if he's been raised with the same values as his mother and thinks I'm being disrespectful by not going along with her plans?" I reached for Jessica's hand, offering what comfort I could while my own heart raced with anxiety about the conversation that would determine my daughter's future happiness. "Sweetheart, if Ryan can't understand why you want your mother included in your wedding, If he can't see the wisdom in avoiding crushing debt for one day's celebration, then maybe Carol did you a favor by forcing this confrontation now rather than after you're married and legally bound to someone who doesn't share your values. 20 minutes later, Ryan's car pulled into the driveway of Riverside Gardens. Through the window, I watched a tall, dark-haired young man emerge, his expression serious but not angry. He moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations, and I found myself hoping that confidence would extend to standing up to his own mother when necessary. Jessica met him at the entrance, and they spoke quietly for several minutes before coming inside to where Marcus and I waited. Ryan Blake was more handsome than his photos had suggested, with kind eyes and an easy smile that I could see why Jessica had fallen in love with. But more importantly, as he listened to Jessica recount the afternoon's events, his expression showed genuine concern for her feelings rather than defensiveness about his family's behavior. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," Ryan said after Jessica finished her account. "My mother has been pressuring you to spend money we don't have on wedding upgrades that would put us in debt for years, while simultaneously suggesting that your mother should be excluded from our wedding photos because she might compromise the aesthetic?" Jessica nodded, watching his face carefully for signs of disapproval or anger. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, processing what he'd heard. Then he turned to me with an expression of genuine mortification. "Mrs. Patterson, I owe you an enormous apology. I had no idea my mother was treating you this way, or making these kinds of suggestions about your role in our wedding. Jessica talks about you constantly, about how hard you worked to raise her and put her through college, about how much she loves and respects you. The idea that anyone would suggest excluding you from our wedding photos is absolutely unacceptable." The relief that flooded through me was so intense I had to blink back tears. Ryan's immediate support for my inclusion in their wedding, his recognition of the inappropriateness of his mother's behavior, suggested that Jessica hadn't made a mistake in choosing our relationship over Carol's demands. "Ryan," Jessica said softly, "there's more. My mother owns Riverside Gardens. She's offered to let us have our wedding here for free, with all the flowers provided as her gift to us. But your mother said that accepting this generous offer would be disrespectful to your family, that there would be consequences if I prioritized my relationship with my mother over the expensive plans she'd made." Ryan's expression shifted from apologetic to genuinely angry, a controlled fury that suggested he understood exactly what his mother had been attempting to do. "My mother threatened you? She suggested that our relationship would be in jeopardy if you chose to honor your mother and accept a generous gift that would save us from going into debt? She said the Blake family has certain standards and expectations, and that if I wasn't willing to meet them, there would be consequences for our relationship that extend beyond the wedding." Ryan stood up abruptly and began pacing the length of Marcus's office, his hands clenched into fists as he processed the full extent of his mother's manipulation and control. "Jessica, I am so sorry. I knew my mother could be demanding and particular about social expectations, but I never imagined she would threaten our relationship to get her way about wedding planning. That's completely unacceptable, and it's certainly not how I was raised to treat people." He stopped pacing and looked directly at both Jessica and me. "Let me be absolutely clear about something. The Blake family's expectations, whatever my mother thinks they are, do not include going into crushing debt for a wedding or excluding family members who don't meet some arbitrary aesthetic standard. Those are my mother's expectations, not mine. And certainly not my father's. Dad would be horrified if he knew what she'd been saying to both of you." Jessica's face lit up with hope and relief, but she still seemed hesitant to fully believe that the crisis had been resolved so easily. "But Ryan, what about your mother? She made it sound like accepting my mom's offer and having the kind of wedding we can actually afford would somehow damage your family's reputation or social standing." Ryan laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Jessica, my mother has Spent so many years climbing social ladders and trying to impress people that she's forgotten what actually matters. My father built his law practice by treating people with respect, regardless of their social status or economic background. He would be the first person to tell you that anyone who would judge our marriage based on our wedding decorations isn't worth impressing. He sat back down next to Jessica and took her hands in his. I fell in love with you because you're kind, intelligent, hardworking, and genuine. I want to marry you because you make me laugh, because you challenge me to be better, because you have values and principles that align with mine. None of that has anything to do with crystal charger plates or premium linens or editorial photography. The transformation in Jessica's expression was remarkable. The stressed, conflicted woman who had been torn between competing loyalties was replaced by someone radiant with happiness and relief. So you're okay with having our wedding here? With my mom providing the venue and flowers as her gift to us? I'm more than okay with it. I'm grateful for it. Your mother's generosity means we can start our marriage without debt. We can have a beautiful celebration that includes everyone we love, and we can focus on what's actually important, which is building a life together based on love and mutual respect. Ryan turned to address me directly, his expression sincere and respectful. Mrs. Patterson, I would be honored to accept your generous gift. Not just the venue and flowers, but the opportunity to start our marriage with the support and blessing of someone who clearly loves Jessica as much as you do. I hope you'll forgive my mother's behavior and allow me to prove that not all of the Blake family shares her misguided priorities. The apology was heartfelt and complete, acknowledging both his mother's wrongdoing and his own responsibility for allowing the situation to escalate without his intervention. More importantly, it demonstrated the kind of character and values that gave me confidence in Jessica's choice of partner. Ryan, there's nothing to forgive, I said warmly. You're not responsible for your mother's actions, and I can see why Jessica fell in love with you. You've just proven that you have the integrity and priorities that will make this marriage successful. Marcus, who had been quietly observing this family reconciliation, cleared his throat diplomatically. If I may suggest, we should probably discuss the practical details of moving forward with the revised wedding plans. There are contracts to modify, vendor arrangements to adjust, and timeline considerations to address. Over the next hour, we worked together to redesign Jessica and Ryan's wedding within a budget that honored both their dreams and their financial reality. Without Carol's expensive upgrades, the celebration would be elegant but modest, focused on creating meaningful moments rather than impressive appearances. The ceremony would take place in Riverside Gardens Chapel, with flowers from my shop creating a romantic atmosphere that enhanced rather than overwhelmed the space's natural beauty. The reception would be held in the main ballroom, decorated with seasonal blooms and candles that would create warmth and intimacy without breaking the bank. Most importantly, the photography would capture genuine emotions and family connections, rather than staged editorial shots designed to impress strangers. Jessica and I would stand together during the ceremony, and I would be prominently featured in all the family photos as the mother of the bride who had earned that place through years of love and sacrifice. 2 weeks later, on a perfect September morning, Jessica walked down the aisle of Riverside Gardens Chapel wearing the same dress she'd originally chosen, her face glowing with happiness as she approached Ryan at the altar. I stood beside her during the ceremony, tears of joy streaming down my cheeks as I watched my daughter marry a man who valued her for who she was rather than what she could spend on impressing others. The reception was everything a wedding should be, filled with laughter, dancing, heartfelt toasts, and the kind of genuine celebration that comes from gathering people who truly love and support the couple. Ryan's father gave a beautiful speech about the importance of choosing partners who share your values, and several guests commented on how refreshing it was to attend a wedding that felt authentic rather than performative. Carol Blake attended the wedding, but her presence was subdued and somewhat sullen. She had clearly expected Jessica and Ryan to come crawling back, apologizing for their rebellion and begging to implement her original expensive plans. When that didn't happen, when they proceeded with their modest but beautiful celebration without her input or approval, she seemed genuinely surprised that the world hadn't ended because of their failure to meet her standards. During the father-daughter dance, Ryan's father approached me with a warm smile and a sincere apology for his wife's behavior. He explained that Carol had always been somewhat status-conscious, but that her interference in Jessica's wedding planning had crossed lines he hadn't been aware of until Ryan filled him in on the details. "Linda, I want you to know that Ryan's decision to stand up to his mother and support Jessica's choices has made me incredibly proud of him," he said as we watched our children dance together. "That's the kind of character and integrity that will make their marriage strong, and it's exactly what I hoped he would do when faced with this kind of pressure." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Jessica found me arranging the leftover flowers into bouquets for the elderly, residents of Millbrook's assisted living facility, a tradition I'd maintained for years with excess blooms from events. "Mom, I need to thank you for something that goes way beyond providing the venue and flowers for my wedding," she said, settling beside me on the garden bench where we'd shared so many conversations over the years. "What's that, sweetheart?" "Thank you for not giving up on me when I was stupid enough to choose social status over family loyalty. Thank you for standing up to Carol when I didn't have the courage to do it myself. And thank you for showing me what real strength looks like, what it means to demand respect while still offering love and forgiveness." I wrapped my arms around my daughter, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the profound satisfaction that comes from watching someone you love learn important lessons about life and relationships. "Jessica, there was never any question of giving up on you. You're my daughter, and I love you unconditionally. But I'm proud of you for finding the courage to choose what's right over what's easy, for prioritizing your marriage and your values over someone else's expectations." 6 months later, Jessica and Ryan bought their first house, a modest but charming colonial in a neighborhood filled with young families. They paid cash for the down payment using money they would have spent on Carol's wedding upgrades, and their mortgage payments are comfortable rather than crushing. They visit me regularly for Sunday dinners, and Jessica has started helping me with wedding arrangements at the flower shop, discovering a talent for design that might eventually lead to her joining the family business. Ryan has become the son I never had, treating me with the kind of respect and affection that makes every sacrifice I made for Jessica's future feel worthwhile. Carol and I maintain a polite but distant relationship, cordial at family gatherings but no longer pretending to be friends. She learned an expensive lesson about the limits of manipulation and control, about what happens when you underestimate people based on assumptions about their social status or financial resources. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean giving up on the people you love. Sometimes, demanding respect and setting boundaries is the most loving thing you can do, because it creates space for relationships to grow and change in healthier directions. As I sit in my garden at Riverside Gardens on quiet evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I think about the journey that brought me to this place of peace and contentment. The scared young mother who once worried about providing for her daughter has become a successful businesswoman who learned to value herself as much as she values others. The wedding that almost destroyed our relationship instead became the catalyst for building something stronger and more authentic than what we'd had before. Jessica learned to prioritize substance over appearances, and I learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. Sometimes the most important gifts we give our children aren't the ones that cost money, but the ones that teach them how to live with dignity, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what truly matters in life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.